and of course everybody else, you're all honoured guests here today. It's now my pleasure to invite the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, Dr. Jane Lomax-Smith, to the podium to say a few words.
Good morning. I also acknowledge we meet on Gun land and thank Councillor Martin for his welcome this morning. It's a great joy to be here and see so many friends of Adelaide in the room. I particularly acknowledge the former Lord Mayors who are with us, former councillors, of whom I see many scattered around the room, our current councillors, Councillor Kouros, our CEO, our executives, and many friends of Adelaide, but particularly Dato Ooi Kee Beng, who is something that we don't have very much of in Adelaide. He is a public intellectual who is a thought leader and a leader of conversations and reform in Penang, or Georgetown, Penang. It's a great honour to have you here. It's been our tradition to have this ceremony since 1859, and although the guest list has changed over time, the format has stayed identical, so I'm pleased that you can be here for this historic occasion. The topics that have been discussed have been ranging from planning, politics, aspirations for the future, comments about history. And today's speaker is particularly fitting because, first of all, he comes from probably what is our most historic, fitting and purposeful relationship with the sister city. He's in many ways a kindred citizen who sees our city through the eyes of someone with a similar heritage and history. Georgetown, Penang was shaped by colonialism, by settlement, by a vision for the future, and has many similarities with Adelaide in that it is a free port, which means that it was multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, and from its origin was built with purpose. It was settled by our Colonel William Light's father, Francis, exactly 50 years before Adelaide was laid out. So that resonance has a significance and is significant for us as we look to the future because they are a relatively new city, youngish city, that has shaped the way it operates. Interestingly, it is an extraordinary tech-strong, innovative hub with a massive investment in technology. It's a city that has achieved World Heritage status. It is a place that has UNESCO environmental recognition. And above all, it's had a very progressive social policy. So it has much in parallel with our city. That's why it's fitting that we have the director of the Penang Institute. And I spoke about thought leadership, but in many ways, Penang, Georgetown is interesting in that the strategic plan, the thinking and the innovation has been driven by public discourse and debate. So it is a city with innovation in its genes. We're very pleased to have Dr. Ooi with us. He has been shaping discourse in Georgetown for more than a decade, but he has also studied in Sweden, where he worked for many years. He's been a visiting fellow and has been the deputy director of the Singapore Institute of South Asian Studies. And now in Penang, he plays a key role in shaping debate. Interestingly, his great author has written biographies of founding fathers of his nation, but more importantly, and I think extraordinarily, has translated Sun Tzu's The Art of War into Swedish. Just think about that. Last year he was the festival director for the Georgetown Literary Festival, which has had a long-term relationship with our literary festival, Writers' Week, and AusAsia. And so it's really fitting that he should be with us here today. So can you welcome, please, Dr. Dato Ooi Kee Beng, and we will enjoy his oration because it will be the first from Penang, but also because he is a thought leader, and we like that sort of idea in our city, and I'm really grateful you could all come. Thank you.
speak with us. And I might add, for those who aren't aware, that our guest joins us fresh from Beijing. Beijing spring yesterday, he arrived overnight, and it is remarkably well, despite the ordeal of flying that distance.
Yeah, well, a good hotel will help in that way. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Lord Mayor for inviting me. Yes, I just arrived from Beijing, passing through Singapore. So within a month, this is the 4th country I've been in. Very, very different countries. So excuse me if I seem a bit disorientated here and there. The breakfast this morning, for example, I couldn't find any porridge or, little things like that throws you off and reminds you of how small the world has become. Thank you to the Lord Mayor for her very kind words on me and on Penang itself. And as you know, if you're in a place, you always see the faults. And it's sometimes really nice to be given a view from outside where you see the good things. If you're in a system, especially if you're running a think tank, you only see the bad things. I could take the case of me and my wife. We moved to Penang 10 years ago. She loves Penang. I love Penang less because I see all the things wrong with it, but she doesn't. She sees wonderful things. Penang's a lovely place. But I see what could have been and what should be and so on and so forth. But I'm sure it's a common problem for everybody. Well, now my being here in Australia, in Adelaide, is still a great surprise to me. There are certain geographical journeys in one step-by-step trip through life that one does not envisage for a variety of reasons. Australia was never on my to-do or to-see list. I lived in Sweden most of my adult life, as the Lord Mayor has said. I left Penang in my early 20s and lived in Sweden, did my tertiary education all the way from undergraduate until, well, lectureship there. And then I moved to Singapore, leaving academia for think tank work, which is slightly different, as you will know. And then recently, 10 years ago, I was asked to return to my hometown to take over the Penang Institute. Now, my intellectual life was strongly formatted by my interest in journalism, which was my first job. Journalism for me meant the phenomenon of communicating and messaging. And then history is another area that I'm fascinated by, partly because I know that we are all born without stories, right? We're all born in need of orientating narratives in which we can perform. And then late in life, philosophy became one of my main interests. That was because words, I found, are such wonderful but yet treacherous tools, leading us as much as they confuse us. And politics, of course, was always in the background, and which in my line of work today actually is geopolitics more than just politics alone. My 5th disciplinary interest, to complete the picture, is actually sinology, the study of Chinese culture, but I shall not dwell on that today. But as you may agree, the most gratifying journeys are exactly of the kind you did not plan, according to your life schedule and your intellectual streams of thought. But these tend to shake you up the most philosophically, and the impressions from such trips tend to be memorable because they stay with you the longest. I'm most thankful to Lord Mayor Dr. Jane Lomax-Smith and her staff, and to the Don Dunston Foundation for inviting me to Adelaide, and for making me feel so much at home already in this wonderful city. The Lord Mayor's wish to seek out ways for collaboration and discussion, pulling on the thread connecting Adelaide and George Town, is for me an inspiring one. And that is why I'm here today. Optimism is inspiring. Optimism is stimulating. I wish to focus today on two things. One is geopolitical history. Now, global consciousness and confusion was visited repeatedly upon humanity over the last few centuries. and humanity has found it difficult to live at peace with its own diversity. It is a self-discovery humanity has not managed very well. Now, I define globalization as the period which humanity has been going through since intercontinental travel began, largely by sea. It has been a period when we humans have been confronted with and have tried to come to terms with our diversity and our ignorance of ourselves and of Mother Nature. Hopefully, we are entering now an age of mature globalization, during which we realize that mutual respect, quoted by economists today as sustainability perhaps, in our actions towards nature, towards other peoples, and towards other individuals, is the best way forward for gaining holistic knowledge, generating civilizational depth, and cultivating humility. This brings me to the second idea after geopolitical history that I wish to focus on today, and that is humanist education. Before modern globalization, civilizations knew of each other as a distanced manner, each introverted unto itself, obsessed with its own discourses and ambitions. What defines modernity is the shrinking of distance between different civilizations and cultures. This has painfully tested the human ability to be humble and humane, tolerant and curious. It has also shown us how far we can go in being cruel and greedy towards other humans, and to be ignorant and arrogant to human events outside our horizons of understanding. Also, when I say humanist education, I'm not accepting the validity of the line drawn between the social sciences and the humanities. I find it hard to consider the wisdoms of these disciplines separately. My love of history comes from my love of philosophy, both Western and Chinese. From understanding my world within a currently salient geopolitical structure and legacy, and finally from the wish to communicate, knowing that I am most creative and original, and hopefully most interesting when I'm seeking to communicate. I remember the deep epiphany I experienced when I first went into the social sciences. This was at Stockholm University. Sociology and psychology offered me novel ways of perceiving the world. I even found public administration, which was my first degree, to be eye-opening, even if boring. I then discovered philosophy and found certain philosophers such as Benedict Spinoza and Ludwig Wittgenstein and many of the existentialists to be awesome and inspiring in how they showed that knowledge is most relevant if gained through a critical mindset and not only from what one is told. Now, I often advise my children and my younger colleagues to try to identify the historical forces at play whenever they think of exploring any particular subject at all. These forces are hard to see because their time spans are so different from that of an individual being. We need a telescope or microscope, as the case may be, to see them. An individual has to understand how global human agency has continuously exerted power over the world and continues to do so, and how events have shaped the world he was born into, and how he or she is to think about that world. Critical thinking has to be about identifying such paths in the individual's lives and of the continued salience of the forces that were in place when he or she was born. What are we caught in? What are we drowning in? What is the nature of the forces acting upon us? Are they invisible? What hand did fate deal my family, my people, my nation? Understanding oneself without understanding what currents one is caught in is surely a vain position to assume. Now, being born in 1955 in Penang is different from if I were to have been born 40 years later, either in Penang or anywhere else. What class, what gender, what race, what religion was I born into? The answers to these provide the framework for one's eventual acculturation. Further down the road, knowing the encompassing tapestry of geopolitical time and ideological space over one's times provides salient material for the reading of one's fate. Now, I do not wish to play down the importance of individuality and individual traits, but what I wish to highlight is the overcoming saliency of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geotechnology. In simpler times, we use the term colonialism to explain global exercise of power and of economic connectivity. While that term is not really usable today, we do have to deal with the colonial legacy and all its contradictions and paradoxes today. In a country like Malaysia, nationalism was always a positive word. Nationalists, I was told, were patriots, they were anti-colonialists, they were protectors of the poor and needy. So imagine my surprise when I first went to live in Europe to discover that nationalism was practically a dirty word. That was an eye-opener for me as a young man living in a foreign continent. Thereafter, reading about nation building, to me always felt a bit limiting, misleading, and disingenuous. Certain geopolitical historical paths had led to the evolution of polities that we soon called nation states. So should not these larger paths and how they have continued to develop be central to nation building considerations? Indeed, how the United Nations is constructed is illustrative of the contingent nature of internationalism and the unresolved problem of global hegemonism. There we have the peer group of nations grouped as the UN General Assembly on the one hand, and on the other we have the first among equals in the Security Council. The contingent nature of that solution, to my mind, is further revealed in how most countries implement in name and in fact federal delegation of power within their national boundaries. And on top of that, we rely on regionalism. We have bilateral and multilateral agreements to mitigate the unsuitability of national centralism. We are a hugely dissected world, a rather unflattering snapshot of humanity trying to come to terms with itself. Lines are drawn across the globe, boundaries, spheres of influence, national divisions, intranational divisions, ad nauseum. There seems no way for us to reject this fragile and defensive posturing in human affairs. To the extent these were drawn from above and how the bottom had resisted this exercise of global power, be it geopolitical, geoeconomic, or geo-ideological, is a key concern in my line of thinking. It has led me to the conclusion that power, compromise, and resistance from the middle is vital to the equation, not just top versus bottom or vice versa. Thus, while nationalism has had salience in the anti-colonial context, federalist attitudes have had to be absorbed as well for things to work. If we imagine that human organization is necessarily multi-tiered, then multipolarity is simply a federalist conclusion applied at the global level. International regionalism softens the centralizing and homogenizing needs of nationalism, and domestic federalism is an administrative, technocratic, and cultural necessity. Therein lies the logic of subsidiarity, the notion that things are best done at the lowest level competent enough to deal with them. There is a need to highlight this way of thinking. Governance as largely a multi-tiered and technocratic matter informed by principles of efficacy and equality. Leadership as the steering and the envisioning towards achieving these technocratic goals, and foreign affairs as an exercise in mutual aid and mutual respect. To my mind, what we should wish for the world today is for it to have some time to reorganize itself into a system of multipolar spheres, backed by principles of national sovereignty encapsulated in the United Nations project, built on multilateralism in trade, and finally, conscious of multi-tiered administration in any polity, be this within and beyond countries. Excuse me. At this point, it is also important to think of the urbanity of globality. Cities and their environments have become the wealth-generating units. And going forward, the focus has to be on cities as the atom in the physics of political subsidiarity, techno-economic innovation, and global cultural development. So it buoys my spirits greatly to be here today, to be invited here by the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, to imbibe what I can of your wonderful city and to gain inspiration from the difference between where I now live and where you live. I shall not exaggerate the commonalities that exist between the two cities. We cannot live on past similarities alone. Instead, we should work towards future convergence in interests, in values, and in relations. It is uplifting for me to see Adelaide show interest in Georgetown, seeking productive connections between countries, between cities, and between individuals is the way to go. It's a no-brainer, really. But no-brainers need champions. To connect to my point about humanist education, you need people with a humanely idealistic and optimistic mind to take the lead and to generate the healthy and humanist discourses that we will require the more we go into the world of AI, of robotics, and of algorithms. Now in Penang and Malaysia, we are fighting an uphill battle in many ways. Firstly, our education has been compromised for decades. As with most new nations, the social sciences and the humanities were sidelined and diluted into irrelevance. We are still living with the consequences of that. Literacy in the country is locked into discussions about race, religion, and royalty. The reform government that is running the country today, for all its weaknesses, is actually an attempt to limit the damage wrought by overzealous Malay ethno-nationalism. And correcting the situation from within is no easy undertaking. To break the thinking molded by persistent ethno-nationalism, I believe that geopolitical history and the possible futures that subject can offer is a necessary path to take. Putting Penang in the world, contextualizing Penang in geopolitical history and in contemporary strategic concerns becomes a vital path to explore. The sister city structure Penang has can be used in this context to internationalize Penang's self-image and therewith also Malaysia's. Another asset we have is the federalist structure Malaysia was born with, which offers paths towards greater subsidiarity in the governing of the various states within Malaysia. There's also a great interest to connect at lower levels, at secondary city level, at think tank levels, at NGO levels. The idea of subsidiarity, of localization, of regional supply chains, of knowing thy closest neighbors, or getting to know distant relatives are becoming relevant and are much needed. I believe such sentiments have great implications for how top-level geopolitics are played out, even in the short term. With Canada's anger with the USA, EU disappointment with the USA, and rising interest in Southeast Asia because of the semicon industry that we have, encourage Australia to rethink its place in the world and see Asian societies as trendsetters. But really, being in the Asian neighborhood, being in the Indian Ocean, Australia's role in the coming geopolitical map is of great interest to people in Southeast Asia. Going forward, we have to generate discourses aimed at consolidating the winnings of the process of globalization so far. These can include, and I'll list some of them, these can include stronger economic democracy through fiscal and other forms of devolution, connecting cities as centers of economic growth, knowledge hubs, and cultural vibrancy, being international, being inter-civilizational bridges, understanding multiculturalism as the given basis for modern society. Mobility is as much a modern condition as urbanity, be this through the enhancement of mobility of people, goods, capital, and contraband and crime as well. And of course, lastly but not least, environmental balance and food security. These are to me the challenges of the 21st century. How shall the humanist mind thrive? To sum up, the concepts to develop in the near future, I think, are 1. Multipolarity, 2. Multilateralism, 3. Multiculturalism, 4. Subsidiarity, 5. Sustainability, 6. Regionalism and federalism, and 7. Humanist education. Thank you all for your attention. I look forward to learning more from you on what I've been talking about. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ooi, for that address. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will see moving among you members of our staff who are distributing wine. I think it's port, I'm not sure about that. And fruit cake, which is part of the tradition of Colonel Life. We all join in a toast in a moment when the wine is distributed. It's a very small glass. I should warn you that there is more to come in the Queen Adelaide, so I trust you won't be disappointed. One of the disadvantages of age, and I'm not talking about Colonel Life here, is that one sight deteriorates. And I neglected to mention in welcoming people, special guests, former Premier Lynn Arnold. Welcome, sir. Good to see you again. Now, while the wine and the cake is being distributed, I've been asked to describe the objects that you see here on the table on the podium. And I have to acknowledge there's a bit of a bar that I have to meet here. Last year, the CEO, Michael Setchman, was sitting in the front row at this, and he did such a great job. I feel somewhat intimidated. So let me just describe these implements to you, and I do invite you at the end of the ceremony to come and have a look at them, because they are quite beautiful. The first thing is historically important to today. It's a silver bowl, a George III sterling silver bowl, made by William Grundy of London. Now, the bowl was presented to this council on January 31st, 1859, and it bears the inscription, "Presented to the Mayor and Corporation of Adelaide, that they may thereout drink in Australian wine in memory of Lieutenant Colonel William Light, the first Surveyor General of South Australia." The bowl was actually gifted by some of the original founders of the colony, George Palmer and Jacob Montefiore among them. They were two of the original commissioners appointed by His Majesty William IV in 1835. Now, and it's really quite an interesting little piece, the little silver coffee ladle alongside the bowl is in the form of a soldier's helmet of the period of Charles I, and it was made by Charles Edward Fernpapa in 1860. Now, we also have two loving cups, the first of which is not as ornate as the second. It is a three-handled loving cup with a historic cylindrical form and glass base, and is engraved with the monogram from 1877. Now, the more impressive of the two is from 1877. It is a three-handled loving cup of colonial sterling silver and was made by J.M. Wint of Adelaide. And it was presented on the 3rd of December 1877 by the then members of Parliament of the city. And it's inscribed on two of the shields as follows, and there are two shields there, presented to the Mayor and the Corporation of the City of Adelaide by the members of the City, J.C. Bray, Thomas Johnson, William K. J. Darling, Neville Blythe. And a third shield, the City Arms are erected underneath Henry Scott Mayor. The vessel is displayed in the Colonel Light ceremony every year. Now, for conservation purposes, we don't fill the silver container in the bowl any longer with wine. It comes straight from the bottle, to be realised. And of course, let's not forget the portrait of Colonel Light sitting beside the podium. That is, to those of you who are keen-eyed, a copy. The original is at this time undergoing conservation, and in the next few months it will go back on display in the Colonel Light room. Now, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you if you're able to be upstanding? I wonder if I might ask our staff for art. Today we honour Colonel Light's legacy, including the original silver bowl presented to the City of Adelaide by the founders of the colony I mentioned earlier, and preserved in his memory. And it was their intention that this bowl should be used annually by members of the city and our guests, as they say, in the memory of Colonel William Light, the first Surveyor General of South Australia, and for this to be an annual ceremony, which it is. May I ask you to raise a glass to the memory of Colonel Light. Colonel Light. Colonel Light. Cheers. Thank you. You may all be seated. Oh, water this out.
It's a tough ask.
Now, I'd like to ask the Lord Mayor to make her...
Well, firstly, thank you, Phil. I must say I'm grateful. As you swept along the dais discussing the heritage items, you didn't include me in that as well, so thank you very much for that. I know that looking around this room, probably at least a third of you have been to Penang. If you haven't, I would recommend it, because you will see a modern economy that has been the beneficiary of debate and strategic planning and investment that has really changed the environment very substantially. I know that many of you have been involved in heritage conservation and will see the work that has been done in revolutionising their economy and their tourism sector. You will know that there is, when you visit, that there is a push for more housing and more canopy cover and more greening and more equity and more justice across the sectors of the community. You will see all the challenges that we face being addressed perhaps in different ways. And you might wonder, some of you, why, apart from something that happened nearly 200 years ago, we're a sister city. Well, it was the decision and the drive by Don Dunston 50 years ago last year that ensured that we became a sister city. So that's why the Don Dunston Foundation, of which I'm the chair, is co-sponsoring and involved with this visit. Because it was a vision that Don Dunston had, that the cities were about the same size, about the same economy. Of course, George Town is the whole of the metropolitan area, whereas we're only the CBD area. But the relationship has endured, and it's been a very strong source of international students who have chosen to study in Adelaide. It's become commonly known because of the Light legacy, so you will find people across the city know Adelaide and know this place. Now, Kee Beng has spoken of many things globally, which is a long vision for the future, and I hope that, like me, you found that as interesting and an enduring vision, because it shows us where we have to go in the future beyond the nuts and bolts of everyday life. And I think it's really important to take a long view. And one of the long views this city has been considering in the last few years is the fact that we're approaching 2036, which is our bicentenary. And many of our city targets are aimed at, for instance, doubling the population by 2036, by getting 40% canopy cover, and there are targets that set out that horizon. So when we celebrate our bicentenary, they will be celebrating their 250th, and I'm hoping that in the next 12 years we'll have more gains from our sister-city relationship, in that there'll be linkages with the universities. The University of Adelaide is represented here today, our arts sector, and many other ways, because if you have a sister, you shouldn't forget them. And it's really important to build on the opportunities we have. So I thank Kee Beng for coming and sharing the global vision. I thank you all for coming here today, and for those people who would like to carry on the conversation, please do. We'll be in the Queen Adelaide room shortly, and I guarantee, well, I assure you that the members of the Adelaide City Council don't usually drink alcohol before lunchtime.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I might mention in a shameless plug as well that this is History Month, and there is in fact a play about the life of Dunston as part of the History Festival, which I saw last night, and which I recommend to you.